Hey guys, it's Ben. This video I'll be explaining what persistence is, common methods employed by malware to achieve persistence, and most importantly, how you can hunt for persistence on your own computer. Let's begin. So what is persistence? Persistence is a tactic from the MITRE attack framework, and MITRE's definition is the adversary is trying to maintain their foothold. So what does this really mean? Well, let's say you're a threat actor, you're an adversary, you're a cyber criminal, and you've gained initial access to a particular computer. And maybe you've got a reverse shell, or you've executed malware. What happens if the computer restarts and that initial process gets killed? Or potentially, let's say you gained initial access via brute forcing RDP on a particular user account. What happens if the password changes and that initial access vector no longer works? Or potentially you gained an initial access via exploiting a vulnerability on a public facing web server or server. What happens if that gets patched and you can no longer use that same initial access method? So this is where persistence comes in. Persistence will allow the threat actor to regain access without using that same initial access vector. When we talk about backdoors, we're really talking about persistence. A backdoor allows an attacker to regain access and allows them to persist on that host or within the network. So here's the MITRE attacks persistence tactic page, and we can see here there are a lot of different methods, different techniques to perform persistence. Some of these are more commonly used than others, and I'm going to go into those common techniques in a second, but we can see there is a wide variety of different techniques which are used to perform persistence. Some of these relate to user accounts, and we can see, look, there's references to systemd service, which is associated with Linux. We're only going to be looking at Windows-related persistence mechanisms, and we're going to be specifically looking at persistence mechanisms that are typically used by malware. So you may see here mentioned somewhere about MFA being registered as a persistence mechanism. I'm not going to be focusing on the sort of user account identity-related persistence. I'm going to be focusing on malware persistence and how we can hunt for that. So from that MITRE attack tactics page, we saw there are a large number of distinct persistence techniques which a threat actor could use. However, from that list, there are a much smaller number of persistence techniques which are frequently used, and there is an even smaller number of persistent techniques which are used by malware. And these are those three common techniques here: scheduled tasks, services, and ASEPs, or auto start extensibility points. I'm going to go into each of these in much more detail, but before I do that, I'm going to have a look at some sort of reports and some documentation to back up the fact that I'm stating these are sort of the most common. First of all, from Huntress, they produce a series of blogs, their Defender Handbooks blogs. This one is specifically on persistence, and they've had a look at the MITRE attack framework and the persistence tactic, and they've identified there are 19 known malware persistence mechanisms which attackers could use. However, out of those 19, there are 3 which they see most frequently. These are your boot or logon auto start execution and initialization scripts. These are what I mentioned earlier with the ASEPs, the auto start extensibility points, and they also see scheduled tasks used very frequently. Another report is Mandian's mTrent 2024 threat report. This is a really interesting report. I would thoroughly recommend everyone go read this. I'll include the links to both the Huntress and this Mandian report in the description. What Mandian have done is they produce this report once a year, and in the year leading up to this, the production of this report, from all their intrusions they've dealt with, they've mapped and classified what techniques the threat actor have used to the MITRE attack framework. And then with all this technique of all this data of threat actor techniques, they've come up with some statistics and some percentages of which techniques are most prevalent in their intrusions which they've dealt with. From this, we can see 16.7% of all intrusions have used Windows services for persistence. 14.8% have used scheduled tasks. 8.6% have exploited weak registry permissions to use services as persistence. This closely relates to the Windows service technique. And 7.1% have used run keys or the startup folder for persistence. And you will notice, look, there are other techniques like DLL hijacking or WMI consumers, which are used. However, they're nowhere near as prevalent as the use of scheduled tasks, Windows services, or run keys and startup folders, the ASEPs. So let's dig into those three persistence mechanisms in more detail, and we'll specifically talk about how we can detect it, and how we can hunt for it. So first of all, scheduled tasks. Threat actors abuse the legitimate Windows Task Scheduler to persist malware. So the Windows Task Scheduler is a legitimate feature of Windows which is used by software to, say, run an executable or a binary maybe once a month, once a week. You will frequently see this software using this to, let's say, check for an update once a month. However, adversaries have quickly taken advantage of this, and they have used this feature to maybe run their binary once every 30 minutes, once every 60 minutes. This ensures that if the computer gets shut down, when the user logs back in and it's running again, the malicious code, the malware, will continue to execute. So there's one particular use case of where this has occurred, and this is from the Unit 42 team, the sort of threat intel team for Palo Alto, and they released a report on a cryptojacking campaign which they've named Lucifer, the malware associated with that. And this malware achieves persistence by establishing scheduled tasks in the command line. And the schtasks.exe, or the scheduled task utility, can be used to do this. In this case, they've named the task QQ Music, and we can see the file path to this sort of malicious binary is located in the user's download folder. It will execute once a minute. So that is one particular case of where scheduled tasks have been used. If you do go to the MITRE ATT&CK scheduled tasks persistence technique page, you can see all the different threat actor groups which use this technique, and you'll see there are an extremely large number of groups which do it because it is an effective technique, and it's something we see everywhere. Secondly, ASEPs, or auto start extensibility points. So these refer to mechanisms, legitimate mechanisms within an operating system that allow programs to execute within on-system startup or user logon. There are hundreds and hundreds of ASEPs specifically in the registry. However, there are a set number which we see very frequently, and these are your run keys. We'll typically see executables within these run keys, and whenever the user or the machine boots, these will get executed. There is also a run once key, and you see in that one, in that registry key, malware. However, that's only executed once, and then it's removed from the registry. We also see, like I mentioned, a large number of registry locations which can be used as ASEPs. There are a smaller number of file paths, and one of them is this startup folder within the app data location. And once again, an executable or a shortcut or link file to an executable will be placed here. When a user logs on and the machine boots, this will execute. Lastly, and before I move on to that, like I mentioned before, with the scheduled tasks, they used Lucifer, what Palo Alto called this cryptojacking campaign, use scheduled tasks, they also used the run key as well. So we will frequently see malware abusing more than one persistence mechanism. The reason they do this is such that if one of their persistence mechanisms gets found, they'll have a backup just in case. So we can see here the two registry keys where the malicious binary is sort of written to. Interesting stuff. Services. So like the remainder of these, the persistence techniques, they all involve legitimate features like services. Services typically run early in the boot process, and they ensure important processes are running. These are core to the Windows operating system, however they are abused by threat actors. We can see this is the registry key where services are stored in, and we can see you can log and audit service creation with 7045. And once again, this is how you would create a service. You can use the sc.exe command line utility, and in this case this comes from a Trend Micro report, and they've named a service called sysupdate with the bin path is the binary path. You can have like a PowerShell command line or an actual binary located here, and it will execute it. They use the scconfig command to start automatically, and then they use the net command to start this. So talking about detection opportunities, there are quite a few we can do here, right? You could monitor for event ID 7045, you could monitor for the use of the sc command, and potentially net start as well for a particular service. And going back one, ASEPs, you could monitor file modifications to these registry locations, and with scheduled tasks, you could monitor for schtasks.exe spawning. That is how you can sort of detect this, and I'm not going to go into detail on that. What I am going to look at is hunting for this activity. So for the remainder of this video, we're going to assume a compromise, right? We're going to do a proactive threat hunt on a particular host. It will actually be my computer, and we're going to hunt for potentially malicious persistence mechanisms that could be set up. And I would encourage you to do this on your own as well, on your own computer, and you may find something interesting. So yeah, let's get on with it. So to hunt and audit the persistence mechanisms which are set up on my computer, I'm going to use the Autoruns tool. This is part of the sysinternal suite, and it is a fantastic tool which allows you to gather all the data of scheduled tasks, services, WMI, WinLogon, loads and loads of persistence mechanisms, including the common ones we mentioned. And there's a GUI version and a command line version. I'm going to be using the command line version as I find it easier to parse the data in a CSV than it is to use the GUI. As I mentioned, we're going to use the Autoruns executable to generate the telemetry and sort of query the host for all the possible places persistent mechanisms could exist. Well, once we've got that data, I'm going to use the timeline explorer from Eric Zinnemann to actually sort of parse and understand and analyze this data. So you can download it from Eric Zimmerman's website. I'll link it in the description, but you would want to download the timeline explorer from here, as this is a great tool which will allow you to sort of analyze the data you've captured. It can analyze more than just sort of Autoruns output. It can analyze a hell of a lot of stuff, and it's a great tool. So download the timeline explorer. So hopefully you now have the Autoruns tool downloaded, and you will notice there are two binaries. One of them is just autoruns.exe, and then you may also have an autoruns64.exe, and then you will have an autoruns.c.exe and an autoruns.c64 for the 64-bit. I'm going to be using the Autoruns.c version. This is the command line version. The other version is a GUI. However, we'll be using the command line version. So the TAC A accept EULA is to accept the license agreement. The TAC A and then the sort of asterisk, the star here, is to choose all of the the possible auto start collections. You can choose individual persistence mechanisms to look for, so potentially you may do this and do M, and I'm just trying to think of some of the others, T, and this will look for WMI, persistence, and scheduled task. However, there are a lot of different methods, and doing the wildcard, the asterisk, will include data for all the persistence mechanisms. The tag S is used to verify the digital signatures of the binaries. The tag H is to include the file hashes, and the tag C is to output as a CSV. Well, they're going to output this command, we're going to pipe or forward the output of this Autoruns command into this CSV file, and we will run this. This may take a little while to run because there are lots of different places where Autoruns can exist, where auto start, where persistence could be established. Although, like I mentioned, only a few of those are frequently used, we're still going to capture all the data for our analysis. And I want to mention, I am doing this on my my native Windows host. I'm not doing it on a VM, and the reason is I want to show that there is a hell of a lot of noise, just genuine benign activity which is generated on a normal host. Normal software uses it, so that's one of the challenges when analysing it, being able to sort of identify the bad from the good. So we can see it's outputted into the Autoruns output. The command is finished. I'm going to open Timeline Explorer. As I mentioned, this is a great tool created from Eric Zimmerman. What we can do is we can go File, Open, and we've got the Autoruns output there. And I'm going to open this, and this looks a bit messy. We've got timestamps, we've got entry locations, we've got categories. It's taken up quite a lot of space. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the File, and I'm going to say, or Tools actually, and reset column widths. This will save a lot of space. And the enabled column will tell us whether this particular auto start, this persistence mechanism, is enabled. And you'll notice I am saying persistence mechanism when talking about legitimate stuff. You get the point. So I'm going to ensure that we only include enabled ones. At the moment, in the bottom right hand corner, we can see there is 1,635 different methods which are used on my computer to auto start a program or a script, or to supply persistence to a legitimate program. So if we filter by enabled, we can see this now goes down to 1,529. So there's roughly about 100 disabled entries. From this, we know a lot of these are legitimate, so we want to find an effective way to sort of get rid of the noise. And a good way of doing this is by looking at the signer. We can see a lot of these are verified by Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Corporation, and these are likely going to be legitimate. If they have a valid Microsoft signature, they're going to be legitimate. So what we can do is we can click on this and we can choose to sort of get blanks. This is where there is no signature. We'll also want to choose when the signature is not verified. So this one's by Igor Pavlov here, so we'll click that to enable this one, and we'll also want to enable, maybe there's a Microsoft Corporation which has not been verified. We want to choose to include those, and maybe the same with Razer here. We'll also want to scroll down and look for any signatures which we don't recognize to be companies. If we saw something like NVIDIA, or maybe OpenVPN, or Nmap, or Microsoft, we can choose to ignore those because they are going to likely be legitimate. However, WireGuard, I'm not sure I know what that company is, so I'm going to include this. THX, I'm also not familiar with that, so I'm going to include that in the results. The same with the Document Foundation. And scrolling up, we can see Sophos there, I trust that. Signal, I trust that. This Miyazaki one, I'm not sure I trust that. So let's have a look. The reason why I'm choosing even verified signatures is malware developers sometimes sign their malware. It is rare, but it does happen. So I'm including it just to get good coverage. And now we can see we originally had 1,635 persistence mechanisms. Now there is only 26 entries, right? A lot of these are going to be legitimate. However, we'll have a look. And by the way, I have sort of included some malicious persistence mechanisms in here, so we can sort of discover those when doing our analysis. I haven't actually included malware. It's fake malware, but it would look like what legitimate malware could look like. So we've still got quite a lot of output, and we can see in the category column, this is where the different type of persistence. So we've got services here, we've got tasks for scheduled tasks, log on for your sort of your ASEPs, and a few others. Known DLLs, this relates to DLL hijacking, and some other driver stuff. I'm going to start filtering these. Let's start off with log on, and we can see here we've got the entry location, so we've got a run key, and we've got the entry as Razor Synapse, and it's not verified. We can see the company is Razor, and we can also get a hash from this. So what could you do with this hash? You could put this on VirusTotal, you could look up on maybe known legitimate hash databases, and when you did this, you would find this is a legitimate hash. Although this is unsigned, this is legit. This is a legitimate Razor executable for my keyboard. So we don't need to worry about this. The next entry down here relates to OpenVPN, and this is another one of the ASEP locations. We didn't mention this one. It's one of the less frequently abused, and we can see the file not found is reg, but we can see it uses a launch string, and in this case, what is this doing? It looks like it's adding something to the registry key, and it's adding an entry to the run key, which is a persistence mechanism. So this is quite strange, right? In an ASEP location, what it's doing, so when this executes, it will add a secondary persistence mechanism. In this case, it's referencing a file path to an OpenVPN executable. If I was investigating this, I would go to this file path, I would take a hash, I would check if it's legitimate, and it is. This is normal behavior. This is sort of just BAU activity for software. So we don't need to worry about this. We've sort of covered all bases with the logon ASEPs. We can now move on to maybe looking at the scheduled tasks or the services, and I'll do that now. So we'll have a look at the services, and we can see going to the beginning here, there's one service called Word Doc Update, there's one VS SVR, and LibreOffice Maintenance. They're all enabled, and from the description we can see one of them is the THX Windows service, one of them relates to LibreOffice, and these two are verified and signed. This one does not have a signature, so we're going to have a look at that one first. If we scroll over, it says file not found hidden, and then we can see in the launch string something concerning. We see encoded PowerShell. If you see this in a service, red flags should be raised. If I saw this in the wild, I would almost certainly believe this is malware. This is not something you see regularly. So what we can do is we can decode this, right? This is base64 code. We can copy this here and take this into CyberChef, and we can say from base64, you found my persistence mechanism. I installed this service to make it look malicious when it's totally legitimate. What else would you be looking for, right? We can see these executable in Windows System 32 and this update service here. If you saw other binaries, you may want to look up the hash. If it's in Windows System 32, it's likely to be on VirusTotal. Put the hash on there. It will come back clean, I'm guessing 99% of the time. If it doesn't come back clean or you don't get a result, you should be concerned. If it's in an unusual file path like a temp folder, check it. And especially check it if it's not signed. In these cases, we can do this and we can look up both of these on VirusTotal, and I will do that right now. I'm going to copy this one, and I'll scan this one on VirusTotal. We can see this comes back clean. and we'll do the same for this VSSR RV1 here. Put this into VirusTotal, and we can see this comes back clean. So we don't need to worry. It's signed, it's got no VT hits, we're all good. So we've covered services. Like I mentioned, scheduled tasks, services, and those ASAP locations are the most common. Let's have a look at scheduled tasks. So we can now see we've got 3 scheduled tasks here. One of them is called ASR APP Shop, and one of them is called NPCAP Watchdog. We've got the dates where they've been installed here, and the keen watchers would notice this one has been installed very recently. So suspicions may be raised, but let's validate this is the case. We can see in the image path, one of these looks particularly suspicious. One of them is a servicehost.txt.exe. So it's got a double file extension which raises concerns massively. Secondly, it's in the temp folder, and thirdly, it's attempting to masquerade as a common process, servicehost.exe. So if I saw this in the wild, I would know for certain it's malware. If you wanted to, you could validate this, and you could search this up on VirusTotal, and I'll do that here, and you can see it was going to give no hits because I haven't uploaded this. This is just a TXT file. I've edited the file extension. I am not installing malware onto my main host. However, there are other stuff which may raise concerns, like this here, this ASR pshop. We can't actually find it, right? The file is not found, so we can't validate the hash of this. We don't know for certain what is going on. This could be signed, right? We don't know because it doesn't exist on disk. And finally, there's this npcap check status.bat. This may raise concerns. You may know npcap is sort of installed when you install nmap, and that's likely where it's from. But if you wanted to validate this, you could go to a directory like this, and you could go on check status.bat, and you could go edit, and we can see, looking at the batch script, it is legitimate. It queries something related to a service for npcap. We don't need to worry about this. It is all good. If you wanted to, you can take a look at some of the other categories of persistence. We've looked at the logon services and tasks. There are also drivers here. So if we have a look at the drivers, these are your unsigned drivers. If you saw these, you may want to be extra careful with these, because drivers can sort of provide an extremely high level of privileged access. If you're experienced maybe a bring your own vulnerable driver attack, or some fancy rootkit which involves a kernel level driver, you want to validate that these are legit, and there's a few ways you can do this. Obviously, you can check the hash, so put this into VirusTotal, see if it comes back clean. What you could also do is look at a known sort of baseline of normal Windows activity, right? If you get a clean Windows install, which you know for certain is going to be legit, check if this driver exists on there, right? If it exists on there, it's likely going to be legit. It goes without saying, yeah, check the hashes, stuff you would usually do, right? And then what other techniques do we have? So we've also got Explorer and known DLLs. So known DLLs is a registry key which I'll give some context. Right, when you use software, it will often load a DLL. These provide additional pieces of code, and when it loads the DLLs into its memory, the software doesn't always provide a full file path to go look for these DLLs. So what the program will do, it will have a search order of places it looks for DLLs. It will start off in the current directory and says, is this DLL in here? It will then move to maybe Windows system, see Windows, and then it will check the known DLL's registry key. And in the known DLL's registry key, there are a list of common frequently used DLLs. What a threat actor could do is modify this registry key, and the threat actor could implant a malicious DLL in this run DLL's registry key, such that when the process tries to load a legitimate DLL, it loads the malicious one instead, and it will do some DLL hijacking. This is a technique which isn't as prevalent as the others, but it still exists. Just like there are other persistent mechanisms which still exist, which I'm not going to cover. So that's how I would go about hunting for common persistence mechanisms on a Windows host. Like I said, I encourage you to do this at home. Maybe you'll find something interesting. Hopefully it'll be all clean, but give it a go and see what you find. I hope you enjoyed this video. Cheers.